Good morning, girls. In the last session of J2EE, we completed our example of Hibernate, and we have also covered how you can create your annotation Pojo file, right? In today's session, we are going to cover Hibernate Inheritance. Let us begin. Today, we are going to understand how to map inheritance between the classes to the database using Hibernate. As you already know, inheritance is used when a class wants to use or inherit the features or property of another existing class. The class that wants to use the feature of another class is called subclass, whereas the class whose feature are to be used inherited is referred as superclass. A class inheriting from another class can access its features and can also add its own specific feature. We can map the inheritance hierarchy classes with the table of the database. There are three inheritance mapping strategies defined in the Hibernate. Number one is table per hierarchy, second is table per concrete class, and the third one is table per subclass. We can map these classes with the table of the database, right? Let us begin with the first type, table per hierarchy. In table per hierarchy mapping, single table is required to map the whole hierarchy, and extra column known as discriminator column is added to identify the class, but nullable values are stored in the table. Again, there are two ways: table per hierarchy using XML file and table per hierarchy using annotation. The second type is table per concrete class. In case of table per concrete class, tables are created as per the class, but duplicate columns are added in subclass tables. There are two methods for creating this class, using XML and using annotation. For the third type, table per subclass, in this strategy, tables are created as per class but related by foreign key. So there are no duplicate columns. Again, two methods are there: table per subclass using XML file and table per subclass using annotation. In this session, we are going to discuss about only hierarchical structure with Hibernate using annotations file, right, which is a part of our curriculum. So here in the previous page we have mapped the inheritance hierarchy with one table using XML file, not with the XML file, right? Here we are going to perform this task using annotation. You need to use inheritance. Strategy is inheritance type dot single table. These are the annotation required for Hibernate and inheritance, right? Discriminator column and discriminator value annotations for mapping a table per hierarchy strategy. In case of table per hierarchy, only one table is required to map the inheritance hierarchy. Here an extra column, discriminator column, is added in the table to identify the class. Let us see the example. As you can see the diagram on the screen, there are three classes. One is superclass, namely employee, which has two fields, ID and name, of type integer and string respectively, and it has two subclasses, regular employee and contract employee. Regular employee class has two more attributes, salary and bonus, of type float and integer, and contract employee has two more attributes, namely pay per hour and contract period. These are the two fields. There are three classes in this hierarchy, as you can see, right? But we need only one table. The table structure you can see on the screen. It has ID, type, name, salary, bonus, pay per hour and contract duration, these fields. all the fields are together. You can see the data types. Data types are mentioned here, right? Here you can see the values are set to no, nullable. Okay, and other for all other 4 fields it is set to yes. Table per contract class using annotation. In case of table per contract class, tables are created per class, so there are no nullable values in the table. Here the disadvantage of this approach is we have to store duplicate columns in subclass. Here we need to use inheritance strategy, inheritance type dot table per class. This annotation is required, right? Annotation in the parent class and attribute override annotation in the subclass. Inheritance strategy equals to inheritance type dot table per class specifies that we are using table per concrete class strategy. It should be specified in the parent class only. Attribute override define the parent class attribute will be overridden in this class. In table structure, parent class table columns will be added in the subclass table. The same example is continue, right? See the table structure required for this strategy. We need to create 3 tables. Table structure for employee class, ID and name. It has 2 fields only. And for regular employee class, as I told you that we have to add both these fields of super class over here also, and 2 additional fields, salary and bonus. Okay, so it has data replication. In the third table structure for contract employee, again ID and name. These are the member of super class, and it has 2 more attributes, pay per hour and contract duration, right? The third method is table per subclass using annotation. As we have specified earlier, in case of table per subclass strategy, tables are created as per persistent classes, but they are treated using primary and foreign key. So there will not be any duplicate column in the relation. We need to specify annotation for this type are @inheritance and @primary key join column, right? @inheritance with one attribute, that is strategy. Strategy is inheritance type dot join, and another annotation is @primary key join column annotation. This we will use in our subclass. Let us continue the same example. As you can see, it has 3 classes: employee, regular employee and contract employee. How we will create a table structure for this technique? First is our normal table structure: employee class, ID, name, right? Your null is not acceptable. Name, your this value is allowed to enter a null. Regular employee, EID, which is a foreign key, right? Concept of foreign key we will apply over here. Salary and bonus. And in the third table, same way you can see this EID is a primary key defined for this table. Null value is not acceptable. Okay, so in this way you can use inheritance with Hibernate. Now session. A session is used to get a physical connection with a database. The session object is lightweight and designed to be instantiated each time an inheritance is needed with a database. Persistent objects are saved and retrieved through a session object. The session object should not be kept open for a long time because they are not usually thread safe, and they should be created and destroyed them as needed. The main function of the session is to offer create, read and delete operation for instance of mapped entity classes. If you have noticed in our example, we have used session.save, this method, right? So we are talking about this object. Then in the fetch.jsp you can see session.createQuery, right? If you want to fetch all the records from your table, you can use createQuery method to get it back, to get all the records of this table, right? So we are talking about that object. The session object should not be kept open for a long time because it is not thread safe, and the main function of session is to offer create, read, delete and delete operation for instance of mapped entity classes. Instance may exist in one of the following three states at a given point in time. Transient time. Transient means a new instance of a persistent class which is not associated with a session and has no representation in the database, and no identifier value is considered transient by Hibernate. Second is persistent stage. In this stage or in this state, you can make a transient instance persistent by associating it with a session. A persistent instance has a representation in the database, an identifier value, and is associated with a session. Then the third state is detached state. Once we close the Hibernate session, the persistent instance will become a detached instance. A session instance is serializable if its persistent class are serializable. A typical transaction should use the following idioms. Session equals to factory.open session. If you remember, this line we have already used in our example, right? Then transaction tx equals to null. Then session.begin transaction, and your work will go in this area. Then at the end we will do tx.commit as we have done in our example also. Then in the catch block you can roll back to up to the last saved point, right? If your transaction get failed, and you can print the error using print stacked res, and finally you can close the session, right? So here you can see all these three states are mentioned. First is open session, second is it is in persistent state, and at the last in a detached state. If the session throws an exception, the transaction must be rolled back and the session must be discarded. For that you can use some interface methods. There are a number of methods provided by the session interface, but here I am going to list down a few important methods which we will use in which we have already used in our example, right? To the correction, you can check Hibernate documentation for a complete list of methods associated with the session and session factory. Methods are transaction, begin transaction, begin a unit of work and return the associated transaction object, right? Then cancel query. If you want to cancel the execution of current query, you can use this method. Third one is clear. Completely clear the session, make it clear. Then connection close at the end the session by releasing the JDBC connection and cleaning up. You can use this method. Then create query. This can create a new instance of query for the given SQL query string. Next is delete. Remove a persistent instance from the data store. Void delete method, which remove a persistent instance from the data store. And session factory, get session factory. This method get the session factory which create the session. then is connected, check if the session is currently connected or not, right? Then boolean is open, this method check if the session is still open. Then void update the persistent instance with the identifier of the given detached instance. So these are the important methods, and some of them we have already used in our example. So this is all about Hibernate in J2EE, right? In the next session we will continue with our new and last unit. Okay, that's it. Thank you.